Great, and I'm gonna stay either Sarah, maybe Sarah, you could talk about this first, and Javier add anything you've been hearing. But if you read national reporting, you'll see that charitable giving is trending downward. However, when you looked at that chart from earlier about our fund holder giving, there's still just a really great momentum month to month, week to week, that our gifts are going and increasing steadily. Sarah, when you're talking to donors, what are they saying about why they're giving, why now, what they're focused on? And I just think it's really amazing that our chart of giving and generosity looks a lot different than what we're hearing about nationally.
You bet. Hold on, let me get my screen back. I've lost it again. Yes, thank you for that question. First, in full disclosure format, I am not a statistician. I do follow the trends in our industry, and so this is not a technical answer to that. But here's what I know. The data are coming in fast and furious, and it's sort of changing every week now with what's coming in and going out, at least at the Denver Foundation. And what I am hearing when I talk to donors is that looking up, leaning in, and trying to lead change, and understanding we're in a marathon, not a sprint, that we've started with relief, and that we have to move past just relief and start to make those changes. I'll give you two very different examples. I talk to lots of people every week, and on the phone and on Zoom and in email. And I have some donors who call me every week with another $1,000 grant they want to send out, or $500 grant, or whatever, because they've learned about food security or basic mental health care services that are in need. And one of our most significant fund holders, who has granted out over $1 million in the last month. That family also, in addition to giving the money, made masks and went and distributed them at one of their grantee organizations. So people are trying to use all of their gifts: time, talent, treasure, testimony. We're working with people who started as philanthropic before they came to us. And this is very clearly a crisis, and we're working to make a difference in the community. So I'm not sure if that addresses the technical aspect that you're looking for, but is that helpful?
Yeah, absolutely. Javier, maybe you could talk broadly. I know you're having conversations with donors and other funders that are really coming up with creative solutions around rural issues, obviously the arts, nonprofit loan funds. What do you think, how are you seeing people's passion and expertise come to some personal philanthropy?
Yeah, absolutely. We're involved in a number of different initiatives kind of on parallel tracks now, where we're partnering with donors who, as you described, one example, want to drive greater philanthropy and greater change in the rural parts of our state. I'm working with a committee that was set up by the mayor to look at broadband access issues around the metro area. And when you're asking people to work from home, students to learn from home, everyone to receive medical care via telehealth, and you're making a big assumption that everybody has the same kind of access to getting online and to being able to engage in an online virtual world. Kind of ironic, as I wasn't able to connect today, so maybe driving home the point, wasn't able to connect by video, that is. So I think whatever the issue is that is driving inequality, whether it's broadband access or it's just the issues that exist in our rural areas, there are absolutely donors who are more than ready to roll up their sleeves and do that hard work that comes in these next phases. And I say that because as impressive as all of this immediate emergency relief philanthropy has been, not just in Denver and Colorado, but around the country, those those aspects of philanthropy are often the easiest to mobilize. You know, again, as you all have heard me talk about, in a natural disaster, there's a lot of philanthropy that floods to the scene to help people in desperate need. This next phase is harder, but we need the partnerships with funders, with donors, that much more, because it is harder, because the issues are more intractable. So we absolutely look forward to continuing to partner with folks that are laser focused on addressing these inequality issues, however they manifest themselves.
Thanks, Javier. I happened to spend some time this weekend with a friend who runs an organization focused on job training, which is always taking place in the classroom. And the idea that could quickly switch to a digital setting when a lot of people don't have the access. And so they're thinking about really adjusting their mission as around, you know, internet data equity, online equity, and making sure those opportunities get out there. So Desa, on that note, I believe in our last application, we asked nonprofits about what they were doing differently in response to COVID. And I'm sensing, Mark mentioned this too, that a lot of folks aren't changing their mission, but they might be changing their program delivery and what they need to offer people at this time. So could you talk just a little bit about that question you asked about what kind of changes are you seeing a lot of nonprofits have to make right now?
A couple things I would say, you know, just staying on this theme of doing things in a remote way. We certainly were seeing many organizations offering classes, offering support groups, offering services. There was an organization working with LGBTQ youth who was, you know, who may not have any support in their homes, you know, bringing them together virtually. Servicios de la Raza was asking for resources to help expand their teledelivery of health, mental health, and other services. So we were definitely seeing just physical changes in the way that people were delivering their services. But the other thing that we saw and that we continue to hear from organizations who are reaching out, in particular to our Director of Basic Human Needs, which is where we're continuing to have the kind of greatest communication from the nonprofit sector, is that people really are picking up those emergency services that that Mark was describing, that organizations who had not been delivering, you know, food and, you know, some of those other basic pieces were needing to pivot to make those things available to the people that they were working with, because the need was so great for those clients. You know, it's hard to think about job training when you haven't had a meal in a day. So we're seeing those kinds of changes and lots of organizations really thinking about where those basic human needs fit into the broader range of service offerings.
Okay, so we had some questions, excuse me, that came in that I'd like to throw back to you, which is, you know, Mark pointed out that how the lack of tax revenue is really going to impact state budgets next year. And, you know, Julie Riskin also said, yeah, this year's right now is tough, but wait for next year. I know you've had some conversations about how government funding is going to shift. I don't know how specific that you could go into that because I know there are early conversations, but how are you thinking about this sort of over the longer haul?
You know, we're really worried about the budget situation, both at the state, where we're talking about, you know, somewhere around $3 billion, and the city of Denver, which has already put its staff on 8 furlough days and is working on really identifying, particularly because they're so reliant on sales tax, other budget cuts. I watched part of a press conference where Brendan Hanlon, who's the budget director for the city of Denver, was, you could tell, just astounded by some of the projections that were happening of what the budget revenue drop was going to be in the double digits, when back in 2008 it was something like 6%, and was just saying, you know, I feel like I couldn't imagine seeing something like this. So, you know, I think that state and local governments are looking at cuts. There have been just, you know, kind of slashes in the state budget of many essential services and important programs. Some programs that the Denver Foundation is a partner with the state around. There's also some really important movement that's happening right now to talk about what revenues might look like. You know, can we talk about the revenue side of the equation, not just the expense side of the equation? And are there things that can happen in our state's budget context and political context that would allow revenues to be increased in this emergent situation? So those are conversations that are evolving. You know, when Javier talks about places of political advocacy, you know, that's a place that we see lots of our partners participating right now. And I think it's a really complex set of solutions, but one that's really important for the services not only that our nonprofit partners provide, but that our public sector partners provide to people all across the state as well.
Great. Thanks, Stacey. I've got another question for, I'm going to send this one to Javier from David, asking about how TDF is planning for current need and then how that projects in the future, maybe as much as 30 months. He says examples, so, you know, will the current fund, the current critical needs fund stay open? Will it close and reopen as needed, et cetera? I know we're also looking at some creative use of our assets and thinking broadly about how we can continue to be nimble and respond. So Javier, could you talk a little bit about what you're thinking in terms of short and longer term?
Yeah, there's a lot there to unpack. You know, on this idea of being nimble and being able to respond and react effectively, that absolutely has to be part of our DNA going forward. I don't think this critical period is going to end anytime soon. So while, yes, we're talking about a pivot from sort of the emergency relief phase to recovery, resilience building, et cetera, this is all still critical. In terms of funding, you know, that's why I said earlier, we continue to need your partnership. We continue to need your support, especially as the work gets even harder. And, you know, perhaps the headlines start to shift a bit. We have an election coming up. You know, a lot of our attention is going to start to move away from some of these issues that are so on the front lines today. And we're going to continue to need that consistent support because this is not going away anytime soon. And so, you know, I will tell you that it's not like we're keeping powder dry. We are trying to push out as much money as we can to meet this moment, particularly through the Critical Needs Fund. But I agree, we have to look at all the tools in the toolbox as to how we help this region and this state recover and come back stronger from all of this. So that's going to require just continued support. And, you know, we'll continue to adjust and adapt as we need to. But this is going to be a long slog. There's no question about it. You know, and again, when I think about this through the hurricane lens, you know, you look at something like Hurricane Maria, where it devastated the island of Puerto Rico, and immediately millions and millions of dollars poured in. A lot of that, by the way, through the Miami Foundation from corporate philanthropists in America that were funneling money to address the Hurricane Maria issues through the Miami Foundation. But today, there is still widespread damage and significant hurt on the island that hasn't recovered fully from Hurricane Maria. That was over 2 years ago. So that's the same context that I view this current moment through. And frankly, it'd probably be a lot worse because this is going to go on for much longer than a hurricane, which is a 1 or 2 day event. Yes, causes massive destruction in those 1 or 2 days, but this is a slow rolling hurricane across our entire planet. And to come back from this is going to require all of us stepping up in new ways and in bigger ways than we ever have.
Great. Thank you, Javier. We want to open it up. We've got some questions in chat. Does anyone else have a question that you'd like us to unmute your microphone and share with the group? Betty submitted a question. She asked about examples of the issues that the African American Fund is addressing. Dace, I'm going to toss that to you. I know the fund right now is being in a forming stage, and so maybe you could talk about what the vision and plans are for it.
Yeah, as you say, the fund is really just in formation. What we know is that organizations led by serving people of color are oftentimes at greater risk because of the level of capacity investment that has happened historically and over time in those organizations, so that they may need a different level of support during this time based on ways that their funding has been impacted by the COVID crisis. So the fund is just under development. We're just getting the kind of paperwork set up and some of the funding in the door for it. So we'll be able to talk more about what the fund is actually likely the next time that we're all together. But thanks for that question. We're really excited about it.
Yeah, and I believe that fund is also looking at sort of non-traditional creative ways of supporting the community, from small businesses, nonprofits, and really getting creative with their funding. So excited to share more about that when the time comes. One other thing that came up, David asked about the Critical Needs Fund opening and closing. The Critical Needs Fund is actually a standing fund that the foundation uses. I'll let Sarah talk about it, but it's a fund that's always open, and it is our ability to respond to timely, urgent needs. Sarah, do you want to talk a little bit about how it's been used in the past?
You bet. Thanks, Alyssa. And thanks, David, for the question. Yes, Critical Needs Fund is a standing fund that we opened up 14 years ago for exactly this kind of thing. So we collect gifts into it. We solicit support every year. We like to keep maybe a couple $100,000 in it so that when something happens like this, or and I'll give you examples of other things where we've activated the fund, we can be first in with some quick funding and start to get some momentum where we can engage you and get more support for the kinds of activities we're doing. Two quick examples. In the recession in 08-09, we activated the fund for hunger purposes. There was a serious hunger crisis in that financial situation. And what we found was the state was in a very bad position to address it in a systematic way. And so we started by raising money for emergency food grants to food pantries, which is where people show up when they need food. And we made grants to the pantries, and then we had them report back on what they did and what they learned. And then we pulled the pantries together again and said, how can you collaborate? Because what we found was there wasn't a system of pantries. There were a lot of wonderful people around the community who had created pantries on their own and weren't connected to each other. So that collaboration you heard Desa and Mark talk about earlier is one thing that we helped to fund through the Critical Needs Fund going on into 2010 with further funding for food systems, food pantries, food banks. We helped to create an organization actually to work on policy. Food policy. So instead of having more pantries with more food, let's change the way we're distributing food so the people who need it can get it. That is Hunger Free Colorado. So that's one example. In the winter of 2013, there were shelters for unaccompanied women experiencing homelessness in Denver. The shelters were closing. And it was a very cold spring, and no one was addressing it. And so we stepped up with Critical Needs funding, worked with the city, some other providers, made money available to churches and other community centers that were providing temporary shelter, and then also worked with the city for a longer term solution. So the fund is always open. We're not sort of a crisis funder, so we're not always in crisis mode, but we're always ready when there's something where we should step in. And if we can get started, we hope that we can attract your support and magnify that as we mobilize the dollars.
Great, thank you, Sarah. We're right at the end of our time today, so I just wanted to wrap up. You will receive an email from us that has links to our website, where we're sharing information, inviting you to connect with us through our e-newsletter, social media, etc. And you can see the website is denverfoundation.org/COVID. Our Philanthropic Services Group is available and ready to help if you have questions about how to make a gift, about how to make a grant. Sarah and Dace's teams are working very closely together. So helping people really try to bring a laser focus to what is a pretty messy, blurry problem that we're facing, but people putting their own stamp on their philanthropy. So that is, please just reach out to us if you need any assistance and have any questions. And finally, we just wanted to thank you for your engagement, your generosity, and really wish you well. We hope you stay safe and healthy. And we just so appreciate your partnership and all of the generosity and action and mobilizing resources to the people who need it most. So thanks to you all, and thanks for joining us today.
Thank you.